Hey everyone, so I got my friend Travis here today,
Hey guys, how's it going?
and we're going to talk about Frieren and go over some questions that I really wanted to ask him because I know that we've been talking about this. I released a video about, what I thought about season one, and I thought it was truly, honestly perfect. So I wanted to get his opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we're going to start with the first question. Who is your favorite Frieren character and why?
Oh man, there's so many good characters in here that it's actually hard to choose. They all have a lot of really fun moments, but I think I have to go really basic here and go with Frieren herself. I'm sure that's not really like a surprising or controversial take, but it's just really interesting to see a character who struggles with like empathy and valuing time and really connecting with her friends and just watching the character arc of her starting to value those around her more and realizing that there is meaning to even short moments of time and being more intentional with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I do think that Frieren has a sort of kind of undefined kind of character quality because in other anime you get a little bit of it, but she's just so blank sometimes and so, kind of just spacey that you think, oh well, maybe she's just playing this role or something. But really, you get down pretty quickly, I would say, within the first episode or two of like, oh no, wait, she has true feelings. Like she actually cries, for Himmel's death, and it's very surprising to see because there are so many times that you think Frieren is just this random character with no emotion and all that stuff, and the classic anime trope. Except no, it's subverted every single episode.
Yeah, I kind of think of her as lacking self-awareness. Like she takes actions that you eventually understand why she is taking, but it seems like she couldn't really explain it if she asked you about them. And I think that makes her a relatable character. I think all of us like at one point or another, especially when we're younger, go through like a journey of like becoming more self-aware and understanding why we feel what we feel. It's just interesting seeing this like imposed on a character with such a long lifespan.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that there's something unique about her, I will say, but also I don't think that other shows really could, how should I say, really could replicate that, because I know that there are a lot of other shows that have that character that's lived a long time, but honestly they're not much different than anyone else. Now I will say, because she is the main character, she gets a lot more characterization, and so this story focuses on her. But I think that the premise at hand is not really an easy one, and an elf who lives forever kind of gets into the space of, just for instance saying, this character lives so long, then what does it really matter if someone she meets, But then she really learns to kind of change her entire personality. And I think you've mentioned this before, but she also has had that in the past. Like that's there. We've kind of recognized that she kind of already had that feeling, let's just say, of like, joy and camaraderie with her hero's party in the first go around, and then now she's sort of looking back on that, and whether or not we've kind of discussed, is that Frieren saying, okay, I think that let's just say, for instance, I'm looking back at Himmel and saying, oh well, Himmel was really important, big in my life. And so now I can kind of think about that, whether or not she actually truly loved him. I think we talked about this in one of the episodes. I think it's like 15, 16, when they're talking about that ring that Himmel gave her.
Yeah.
And so I think that, whether or not she acknowledges that in the past, we don't know for sure. But now we do know that she really does fondly look back on him, and even so she recognizes that there was some sort of romantic feeling. Whether or not she accepts that now, she can recognize it, I think.
Yeah, I like how people have pointed out in that picture that there's the clock tower in the background, kind of symbolizing that like time is really what separates them on multiple levels, right? Both like the longevity of the lifespan, and then also in terms of the show, like picking up in the present day, that's her past at this point. And I think it almost felt like she realized that she did have those feelings back then, like that journey of self-awareness, but she didn't realize it in time to act upon them.
Okay.
The things that were happening to her, she just like didn't process till 50 years later or more. And it's interesting to see her look back and go, oh wow, like maybe there was something about this dude, but it kind of leaves it ambiguous, so like it makes it more interesting for you as the viewer versus just like slamming it down your throat and being like, obviously they love each other.
Right. No, that's a really great point. I hadn't heard about that with the clock tower symbolizing that time, and I do think you're right that she definitely had some sort of romantic feelings. Whether or not, like I said, she obviously didn't act on them in time. And is that necessarily, just her outlook on life? We've seen before where Frieren kind of just says, well, what's it matter, in 50 years, nobody will remember you. To going to now, she says, well, actually, people can do amazing things. And, just to keep moving in this discussion, I will say there is another part I want to talk more about, Fern and how capable she is. And so much so is she can reach the height of Frieren within, 18 years or something?
Yeah, like a fraction of the time.
And so it's an amazing thing that she now realizes, wait a minute, no, actually somebody can be like burn brighter than me. Even though I might be the most powerful, actually somebody can catch up to me, and it can be a human. So I think that does change later on, and we'll get more into that later on. I just wanted to say, as far as my favorite character goes, it's really difficult. Necessarily, I wouldn't say I have a favorite character. I have a character that I relate most to, and I think it's Stark. And I think that the essence of his character, he's a little bit insecure. He's a teenage guy, and so that really kind of plays the part. I think that maybe women mature a little bit faster emotionally, and they can be very insecure at times too. But I think it's harder on guys because they're expected more. He's such a great warrior. All these people are like, oh my gosh, he's crazy good, and they throw so much upon him, and he's like, well, I'm not that great. But actually he is. He has a lot of talent, and he might not be the strongest person ever, but I really do relate to him in the fact that I think I have myself a lot of potential, but sometimes I kind of doubt myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if that's something that you've picked up on Stark as a character, if you can relate to that.
Yeah, I think that most of the characters in the show do a really good job of having at least one characteristic that you can really relate to. And I think Stark, those are definitely some of the defining characteristics for sure. And I think many of us can relate to that feeling of uncertainty, but then it being obvious in the eyes of others that you're qualified for the thing you're trying to do. So he has constant imposter syndrome. And, there's really no reason when he can take down a dragon, but even after that, it's not like the problem magically goes away with one experience,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I do feel that a lot of times, especially with our generation too, you're kind of on the cusp of that, millennial. And then I'm, my Gen Z. So really, and I'm kind of the first one of Gen Z, but I think that we kind of just say, oh, well, we might have potential in all these things, but we just don't think that we're at where we're supposed to be, maybe. And we think that we should be better because we have a lot more expectations sometimes. And then I think that plays a little bit in Stark, especially with, Eisen being the hero that actually trains Stark. But I think that, him growing so much in just those few episodes, even in the first episode that he's introduced, second episode, he's introduced in episode 5. But even from episode 5 to episode 6, he grows a lot. He's just and it's so funny because you would think in one episode it's not earned, right? And you think, oh, well, no way that someone can have a character kind of change their attitude from one episode to another and it be earned, but it really is. Like, they make you sit and think about, well, why does he feel this way? Like, why does he feel insecure? And then he, talks to Frieren, and Frieren's like, okay, well, you can actually do this. And then he's like, well, I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try. Like, I owe it to, well, myself, my master, the people in this village to actually defeat the dragon. And really, he's just like, well, I only have to do basically keep it busy for 30 seconds is what they say. And obviously he ends up, defeating the dragon himself, which is kind of indicative of his character.
I think part of what helps make that believable also is how well Frieren handles time jumps. And maybe we'll talk about this some later, but I think you get to see him training some in those episodes back with his previous master, and so you don't feel like, oh, he magically went from a really fearful kid to this incredible warrior. Now you've seen years of his progression leading to this point as well.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a good point too. It's very earned that way. But let's get into the second question. What surprised you most about this series?
I think I was most surprised by the fact that Frieren, especially in the latter half of the season, didn't feel unbeatable. In the first half of the season, she's talked so well of, she's part of the party of heroes who defeated the Demon King, and she's training Ferns, and there's really not a single person, even in the guillotine arc, that stands up to her at all. She doesn't feel beatable until the first class mage exam arc, in which you start seeing it's theoretically believable that, say, Ubel could kill her. Or that fight that almost happened in the last episode with the first class mage, maybe he could have killed her. I think it's Lernin or something. And really throughout the series, I'd been kind of led to believe that maybe she's the best and we're never to expect anyone to surpass her because of longevity. But I think that really adds to the show, making her not One Punch Man.
Yeah. And I also think, once again, we're kind of hitting on this, experience time that Frieren does well. We know that she's been alive for over 1,000 years, so why wouldn't she be powerful? That makes sense, right? If someone's been studying magic for 1,000 years, you think that, okay, well, maybe that's that's 1,000 years of training. Now, as far as One Punch Man, it's very, like I said, it's very supposed to be, comical a little bit, kind of parody the shonen genre. And so I think that that's one thing, but also you take different characters that are overpowered for no reason, and we don't think they're done right. They're done correctly. But for Frieren, it's well, I mean, how long has she been a mage? A long time. And so I think that that's definitely earned as her being the strongest in the universe. And then also, well, we figure out maybe not, maybe her, master Sari, or her master's master, Sari, maybe is stronger than her. It's basically said that we think, from what all the other characters are saying, that Sari is a little bit stronger than Frieren. Now, who would win in a fight? We don't know. But I think that when we're talking about experience and all that combined, well, it kind of just makes sense. But yeah, so for me, I think that what surprised me the most, I would just say that how hard the action sequences go. I just didn't think that it was really going to be like that, especially with the first 3 episodes. You get to it and you think, okay, they might do one cool fight in a while, but really it's almost every episode that they do something really cool. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I almost feel like the show wasn't sold to us as an action-filled show. When people first started talking about it, you start hearing rumors that this might be kind of good this season. No one was talking about Frieren as this action-packed, nonstop fight where, this isn't the traditional Shonen Jump type show, right? This is something where the premise sounded interesting, but you're really just told oh, it's what if the bad guy was already beaten and dealing with the aftermath of that. So yeah, I think that was surprising to see that the story did have room for a lot of action, and it wasn't just thrown in there needlessly to fill space. Like everything progressed the plot.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Each sort of fight was almost, I think necessarily, I don't think it was needed per se, as far as like, they didn't need to go that hard, but really that just makes it even better. Like that rounds it out so much better, because I think that Frieren itself, the story is great, you know? I don't think that it really needs a fantastic animation and, you know, great soundtrack that, you know, gets the blood pumping. But it really just makes it all that much better.
Yeah.
So I think that really just kind of surprised me, kind of came out of nowhere, because I think that a lot of people were maybe, even at the time, I don't know if you heard anything about this, but around episode 6 with Stark defeating the dragon, people were kind of mad that there was like some sort of huge fight scene, and I was like, well, I don't really understand that, but I think a lot of people had kind of gotten the impression that it was going to be some sort of low, just kind of calm, chill thing about just talking and dialogue, but really it's like, no, it has everything really for me. And that was kind of surprising, I think, when we saw that kind of pushback from the community. But like I said, that surprised me most. So let's see here. Third question. Name one thing that Frieren does with which no other anime can do or does not do as well, maybe.
I think one thing that comes to mind is communicating like a development of self-awareness and the protagonists over time. Or because I think we talked about Frieren already, how she goes from not really understanding why she does what she does to really valuing the little moments of time between her and the other characters. And you see this as well, I think, with Stark and Fern's relationship, where in the beginning they really struggle with communication, and it takes time for them to process their feelings. And towards the end of the season, they're still goofy, they still cut up with each other, but they've gotten a lot better at understanding why they respond the ways they do, and then like actively working to improve upon that. And I just don't know of another anime that really does that well, with multiple characters all being developed well and not just there to fill space.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can see that. I think a lot too with Sign, when we're talking about how he kind of was aware of the same thing, I think. Like, he actually can kind of do a little bit of a diagnosis of like what's going on with Fern and Stark in that episode. I think it was 16 or so, and I think that's one of the cooler things about this show, that you're kind of hitting on that point of like, they're just so kind of aware, but certain characters have their own take on it, right? Frieren is aware because she's had so much time now and she gets actually a second chance. So it's kind of just like hitting on that, repetitive streak of like, hey, you missed this, but now you get to see this in like Fern and Stark. And then I think that you have Sign out there and he's like, well, I kind of missed my chance a little bit, but now I kind of get like a little bit of redemption arc. And then he can almost adequately, kind of like adequately describe and like tell you what's going on. And then Fern and Stark can do a little bit of, like you said, kind of self-reflection. And they do need other characters to kind of like bring that out of them. But they are more genuine, I think, than like most anime characters would be in that situation. I think the romance would just kind of go on and back and forth, but really they act like normal humans. They understand what they did wrong, and they do reluctantly, but they genuinely say what is wrong. And then they don't have to tell the other person, they just have to apologize and find a way to move forward. And they are they mend that. But in a lot of other anime, it's just so almost childish, and just unrealistic. Now, do I think it's funny sometimes? Yes. I think that, Kaguya-sama's misunderstandings and, rent-a-girlfriend's like serendipitous nature of like these little moments that, oh no, that's not what happened. And so I think that's funny. I like that, but I like that in its own category. When we're talking about this show that I take very seriously, I think that it takes itself seriously too, which I like because I'm an intense person. So
yeah, agreed.
Okay, so I didn't even really tell my thing that I think that Frieren does best. I would say that if we had to pick one thing maybe that like other anime don't do as well, I would say pacing. Because we get to actually see time develop, like you mentioned before in this conversation, where we get to skip ahead a little bit, but it's not like it's a big thing. Like they might take, they're like, oh, they spent 6 months here and they cleaned up a village or something. Okay, great. It's not a big deal. So much does happen within a little span of time as far as like towards the end of the season. We really don't do a lot of time skips. We kind of do maybe a month or two between each exam. But, for the first class, mage exam in its total, it's really within just a little amount of time, but so much happens. And it's so fair. Like they take the time where they need to, they slow down, they let you get to know the character, and then they move on. And then they speed up when they have to. And it doesn't feel forced, it doesn't feel like they're trying to get somewhere. They have to get that, Fern has to become the pirate king of all, Konoha village and the Hidden Leaf, It's like, they don't have to do that. They're just chilling. And so like they can take the story wherever they want to, but it still matters.
Yeah, and I think those time skips, those little ones, really add to the believability of the characters getting closer over time, because it's not just like you meet someone and you're instantly best friends. That's a very anime thing to happen,
and very childish,
right?
Too,
Yeah, but you see Fern and Stark and Frieren have traveled together for years. They've built up a camaraderie that comes from years together, and so when they're able to be open and humble and transparent and honest with each other, it's not with someone they met 5 minutes ago. It's like someone they've really developed a relationship with, and they've traveled and had many experiences together. Like, so I believe the show when it says they're closer versus, maybe like Akame got killed. Right?
No, I can't believe you died. Well, I just knew you for like one day.
Oh, right, exactly.
So, but that is a good point too. Maybe I didn't really think about that. Okay, so number 4 here. Why do you think so many different kinds of people appreciate this anime and rate it so highly?
I mean, I think it all comes back to the story. Yeah. I think good stories can touch anybody. Yeah, they transcend genre, and I think that on one hand, I think it's an easy recommendation for someone's first anime now, because at least for US audiences, like it doesn't have what we call like the anime cringe, right? So I don't have to feel embarrassed if I like recommend this to a friend who's never seen anime before and doesn't understand the tropes. But also I think, there's so many little things that different people could relate to in the story, whether it's like struggling to communicate your feelings or feeling fear and imposter syndrome, or, really relatable things like learning to see, value, and treasure the small moments that we have with people because they won't be here forever, and themes of loss. But also there are fun moments in the show too. It's not just heavy story. There's they get to fight and kill demons. They get to go through like a mage exam arc. Like there's so many good like parts to this show that, and combined with good pacing, that I think just makes it a breath of fresh air. When like every season we get at least like 9 bad anime that are just like thrown together and the plots make no sense, and you're like, why did anyone greenlight this?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I do think that's true. There's something for everyone. I know that phrase is a little overdone, but I think this anime is really, serious about it. Intentional, maybe is a good word to say. They don't really do anything that's very cringe, like you were saying, and then also they have everything in it. I think traditional shonen anime fans, I think they can enjoy it. It might not be exactly their speed, but I think that there are parts of it, like you said, that there are fighting scenes that really are amazing, truly, incredible. Like the choreography and the powers and how they kind of play with each other, and subvert things that you think are going to happen in the fight. I do think that there are lots of people that can enjoy this anime for all the reasons you stated. So I would just, kind of like second and agree with, your take on that. I don't know why so many people are rating it as highly as it is. I think it just really goes to show, how much of an impact a good story has, like you were saying, and not just like, a cool premise that they kind of use over and over again. This is its own thing. It's not trying to copy anyone. It's not trying to, force in these tropes that you think that have to be in an anime. And honestly, to my best knowledge, I'm sure there are a lot of tropes, but I just don't really, none of them pop off at the top of my head in this. There are no blatant tropes, we could say there's some like tsundere action and, there's, tropes of like overpowered character or something like that. But really, I just don't think that kind of applies. And so I think that it's just so unique and it's good, like there's honestly nothing that I think they do wrong. We'll get more into that later. But I think that such a well-rounded story, it's honestly, you have to rate it highly. So I think that's kind of where I'm at least. Okay, so where would you rank Frieren's first season in all-time anime list? Top 10, 25, 100? Is it even in the 100?
Oh, it's solidly top 10.
Oh, wow.
I think it deserves the praise that it's getting. Like, I don't know if it's the number 1 or 2 anime or whatever it sits out on my anime list right now. But I think it definitely is worthy of top 10 for a few reasons. One is the lack of filler. We've had plenty of anime with great storylines over time. Some of the greats, being like Naruto or Bleach, etc. But you would fill a lot of these shows with filler. So it kind of distills the story down into something that's just less satisfying because of it. Like, I don't care about this weird fetch quest that they're suddenly on because they're ahead of the manga. Like, that makes it really boring. And unfortunately, Frieren doesn't do that. I think number 2, really good, believable character development is just really interesting to see. Like, people care about people, and I think whether it's an elvish person or a dwarf or whatever, I think these characters are personified well. They're relatable. Like, they showcase emotion. They grow over time. Like, it's everything you would want in a good story. And then also there are consequences to actions. Like, we see, I think, with the traveling arc where they're heading to Oberst, that Scene didn't make the choices that he wishes he would have made in the past, and so now wishes to find his friend Gorilla, but has lived a life where he kind of regrets that. Or same with Frieren, even. Like, Frieren absolutely, I think, regrets not communicating to her party more how much they meant to her, and also not valuing the little moments. Like, not caring about how nice the night sky looks, or about a given sunset, or about a night partying and drinking with her friends, because she's like, oh, but you guys will be gone so soon, or I can do this again in 100 years. Like, there's real consequence to action. And then, like we talked about, because it is relatable and so easily recommendable to other people, I think it's absolutely deserving of top 10. Where? I'm not really sure yet. I think there'd be some recency bias in whatever answer I gave. But yes, oddly top 10, maybe even top 5.
Wow.
Easy.
Yeah, and I think that when we're talking about an objective rating, I think, at least for right now, season 1, it just finished. I think that we can definitely say, as kind of like an anime culture, I think that it has to be at least top 25, I think. Now, where it falls objectively overall, I think that's very difficult to do. Now, personally, it's going to be an easy one for me. It's my favorite anime. I think that season 1 does a lot of great things. It could change in season 2, could really drastically, drop. But at least from what we've seen so far, like you said, so many great things about the characters and how, how they're personified to be real people. As opposed to, kind of just like caricatures that we see a lot of other anime that are one-dimensional.
Yeah, I would say as long as they don't pull a Sword Art Online, we're like, everyone
just don't do Sword Art Online.
Yeah, they just everyone generally liked season 1. But then season 2, you're like, oh, they just copy and paste that and did it worse. And in season 3, you're like, how many times are they just gonna copy and paste and make it objectively worse every season, and just do it in a weird cringe new area? So we don't know if the standing will stay in the future, but at least for season 1, absolutely top tier. So yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and I think that this gets a little bit into other things, but just as far as me personally, I know that you think that episode 10 is one of the greatest ones. Dude, episode 9, just for me, I think I could, and I've already done a video on episode 9 and talked about it more at length in other my videos. I think that episode 9 does something really, truly different because, it's this battle between these two demons, right? And Fern and Stark are fighting, them. And they're having these entirely different conversations and battles of ideology with two different foes, and yet they both end up winning. Did you have
I really like episode 10 especially just because it's the first time, I don't know if it's the first time, but I think we really start to grasp how powerful Frieren is in comparison to others, because that's the episode where she finally beats Aura, right? And so everyone's so worried about how will her soul stack up? This demon is unfathomably powerful and has existed for so long and has killed so many, and you really have begun to learn more about her time as Flam's apprentice as well. And so it's really just satisfying to get additional backstory on her, and then to see her acknowledge her power and lean into it and say, you thought this, but the reality is I'm stronger, right? And but also winning the battle with her mind. She didn't necessarily just beat Aura to death with powerful spells.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I'm not saying it's a less than moment. Me personally, I enjoy episode 9 a little bit more. But I think that, episode 10 is great. There's a lot to what you're saying about, well, the whole time, she's been doing this by tricking demons, right? Actually controlling her mana and not letting it fluctuate, and not letting it kind of tell what's going on exactly. And that is on purpose, for her master, Flum, or however you say it. She told her, hey, this is a cheap and, deceptive and kind of a, kind of almost as she kind of says it directly, she calls it a mockery of magic. It's very deceptive. And it's not really right to do that. It is kind of underhanded is a good word to say. Okay, you really should be going all out against a creature, to fight it and use your spells to kill it. But it's well, hold on, let me just trick them real quick.
Right, exactly.
And just let them underestimate me, and then I'm going to absolutely demolish them.
Yeah, and to your credit, I think 9 is really cool because you really see how far the training under Frieren has gone for Fern and how far Stark's training has gone. It's just impressive to see her outclass someone who, if time was the only factor here, should be way stronger. And I think same with Stark. There was just beautiful animation, there's just a lot of action, and finally, I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but they're not hindrances to Frieren anymore. They're not weak little children.
Oh yeah.
They're people who can stand their own against the forces of evil.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And I think that's, kind of important to think about, we're talking about that kind of experience and stuff, but they catch up quick,
Yeah, and I think 9, like, if you wanted to do, like, the art school thing and get really symbolic with it, it's like, Stark was fighting someone who had the same techniques as himself, right? And it really kind of, juxtaposes, like, his inner battle with himself, right? To try to, figure out if he really is worthy of, and really is good enough, and which we learn he is. And with Fern, it kind of foreshadows almost, like, her recognizing that, like, she can beat someone who should be stronger than her. Like, she just has that innate talent. And so later when we realize that, like, she is smart enough and skilled enough to see Frieren's weakness and her mana, that we get that. We've seen this rapid development.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's very justified, I think, is a good word to say. It's like, and it's, satisfying as well. And I think that you're hitting it kind of on the head with the, the nail on the head. But I also think that they win in different ways, right? Like, I think that maybe Fern wins because, I'm not saying this is exactly why, but she also has a, more confident attitude. Right? Like, she knows that she's been trained by one of the pretty much the greatest mage of all time. And she has been, and this is very funny. He's like, that Lugner guy, the demon, he was saying, oh, well, I've been training my entire life about magic. Like, I know everything there is to know. And then Fern replies, and, I have to say it in Japanese, watashi mo desu. And so it's like, so have I. And that's so funny because it's like, how old is Fern? She's like 17 at that time, I think. And so she's like this teenager saying, well, so have I. I've been, practicing magic for as long as I've been alive. But really, it's put into perspective later on as well that, Frieren delves into this with Fern about, Zola Tarak, the spell that kills demons. Well, Fern, that was her first spell. That was her first offensive magic spell. So she knows how to use it faster than anyone. And so I think that, that coupled with, it's so great because, like I said, Fern wins the battle because not only is she, very, has a lot of potential as a mage, kind of just based upon, and talent, based upon like her genetics and all that stuff that's predisposed. But I think also of like her just being able to draw faster than anyone, is what like gives her the edge in that battle. But also it's kind of like her unshakable attitude because, Lugner's, he's doing all these flips and whoops and running around and she's just standing there and keeping him on edge the entire time. And he's like, if I do this, all I have to do is just, make sure that she doesn't do this. Okay, well, she did that. But hold on, wait a minute. If I know for a fact that if I just play back and just do a little bit war of attrition, I can win because I have better magic and I have like more mana, I actually have more power. But then he's like, well, wait a minute. Actually, no, I can't do that. And so he's monologuing in his head this whole time of like, this is how I can win. That's how I can win. And Fern doesn't even really say anything. She doesn't speak. We don't get to hear her thoughts really. She just says one word at the end and that's her Zolotarok spell. Like, yeah, she wasn't really sweating. Yeah. Which is funny because, literally, and this is so beautiful, I think, but literally 100 yards away, there's this guy fighting this demon that literally he is not sure of himself, and that's why he's losing. And it's like, that's so funny because, I think that he also relies a little bit more on his master of like telling him, hey, if you just keep getting up as a warrior, you're probably going to win because you're tougher than everyone else. And so I think that there's a lot of, stuff to talk about when we're talking about fighting, especially in Frieren. But, for Stark, it's a totally different way than what Fern does. Fern is really powerful and, has the fastest draw. And so she, just innately has that confidence. But Stark is like, well, I am really strong, I am all this, but he really has to focus more on his toughness, right? His durability. And he just has to recognize, like, and it's just one of the, I think it's, in my opinion, within the past, recency bias, all that stuff, I think that when he is talking to the demon, he's like, yeah, your attacks, they weren't even that strong, honestly. Yeah. And then he just tanks it right in the stomach, and he's like, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm going to kill you. And then the demon is like, pretty much all the way up until the end, she thinks she's going to win.
Yep.
And then as soon as she basically dies, then she has that look of surprise on her face. And it's just the most, like, almost satisfying, but also, kind of like proud moment you feel for Stark.
Yeah.
Because you see yourself a little bit in him, or at least I did. And I think it's just such a beautiful moment of like, dang, I really like that. And then at the very opposite end, Luganer takes his eyes off Fern for half a millisecond, and then she kills him.
Yep.
And it's like, I think it's just such a beautiful episode. But I spent a lot of time on that, so I will defer to you in this other question. How do you feel about other mages in the first class exam, and do you have a favorite?
I think they're all surprisingly interesting. Like, I feel like it would have been interesting to get even more backstory on them, even though I'm glad we didn't for the sake of pacing.
Sure.
I think Ubel is probably the most interesting to me, if I'm even saying her name right.
I think it's Ubel.
Ubel, yeah, because it's just such an interesting power where really her ability to cut through anything just comes back to sheer arrogance. Like, if she just believes she can do it. And like, that's a really major plot point. And this theme of confidence.
So you would do well with that.
Oh, I would do so good. Yeah, I would definitely be. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if I could stand up to the level of like Goth Princess, but definitely. Yeah. And I also enjoy the kind of, I don't know if they're really trying to communicate that they're a couple, but they seem like a couple, like Laween and Kane, however you say their names. I couldn't decide if they were just like really good friends or if they were like,
I think it's a sisterly
yeah,
bond type thing.
Yeah, I couldn't decide there if it was like pseudo romantic between them or if they're just like really good close friends.
Well, it could be because that time she wore that outfit or whatever was supposed to symbolize something. Maybe. I mean, it's possible.
But yeah, it was interesting to just see like different students under Frieren. But really, all of the characters that we get introduced to tend to enrich the world as a whole and have like, they don't feel like just tropey backstories thrown in to like fill space. Like, they're really well developed. Like, but it's not overburdening. What about you? Who would you say?
Oh, that's such a good. Oh, I love them. I didn't think, honestly. I was skeptical, very skeptical at first. I was like, who are all these people? I don't like this. Me, I don't like change. Well, no, I just think that we had something good, and I wasn't opposed to introducing new characters. But I think just kind of dropping, 20 people all on us at the same time, and we didn't really know who was like the worst of all.
Right.
We kind of figured this Ubel was going to be like a problem, some trouble. But really, we could go on and on about her and how great her character is. I think, even though she's very evil, but I think that when we got introduced to all these people, I was a bit hesitant for a little bit. But really, Frieren kind of just blasted right past that. I mean, it was so effortless the way they integrated these characters into the story. I think that, let's see, Duncan, he had a really interesting arc.
Yeah, exactly. Like, his character motivation is so strong. Like, he just really wants to get back to honor his wife's passing.
Such a, simple but very... not relatable, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, I would say Frieren does simplicity well. Like, in a lot of shows will try to like beat you over the head with it, or like kind of downplay it, or like maybe overly caricature a given theme
Yeah.
or like
Mhm.
plot point, but like he's just a simple dude, and you kind of like him and respect him for what he's
Yeah.
trying to do, and like even though has a lot of wisdom, like people don't listen to him, and that's just like very believable in like the way these characters are made. All these mages are like pretty proud of their own power, pretty arrogant, pretty successful, and yet they all contrast Frieren and her party like really nicely.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Nobody really listens because he's all like, "Hey, we literally just have to play together, like, and we win." And then everyone else is like, "Nah, fam,
Nah, bro, we're greedy."
Yeah, and then it's just like, well, they're literally just like you said, they're just being pride for prideful's sake. Really, like, there's no reason why they shouldn't work together. Literally none, except for pride.
Yep.
And I think that's fair. I think that there are a couple characters like this werewolf guy, and then his kind of crew. They kind of stick together and get things done, and then they help out Fern and Frieren, obviously. I think that such a surprising moment was Richter and Levine and Kane's fight. It was just like, of course, like they wouldn't have won without Frieren's help, breaking the barrier, allowing the water to come in. And that, it literally shattered, but also, metaphorically shattered my brain a little bit of like, wow, that was crazy. Like she basically just one-upped her, master's master.
Yeah.
With her, breaking of that spell. She's like, yeah, I analyzed the barrier and I'm about to blow it up. And then so getting back to the Richter fight, I think that his little bit of stoicism and his, very drab and straightforward personality, honestly, a little bit relatable. But also I think shows the, flaw of that logic and kind of just like, you don't win just because you analyze everything perfectly, right? There's these, chaotic events that happen all the time in life, and you don't always have the ability to see, with some foresight. And so you don't get to win just because you prepared,
Yeah, I've heard a quote once, maybe it was in a book, that like, people who like fight a lot come to realize that time and randomness happen all the time. So it's like you can be the strongest, but if you trip on a rock and hit your head, like you still lose.
Yes.
Like, there's just so much you can't predict, and I think the show does that well, where it makes it feel like there are table stakes for everybody, and like Frieren doesn't even get every outcome she wants. Like she gets rejected by her master's master, and there's some subtlety to that decision, but it's not just like she goes through this world and everything's perfect and then she wins and that's the main character powers. Like, there are undesirable outcomes that happen to her as well.
Right. Yeah, and I agree too. I think that that's one of the great things about this anime is that like anybody can lose, but it's not because of some thing that you just say, oh, plot armor, and that's one of the greatest things about this show is that there is no plot armor. Obviously like Frieren sort of has plot armor a little bit, but it's just like, well, also she is the strongest though, so it's fair, it's like it's justified, so it's not really, I don't think, any sort of unearned victories in this anime. I think a lot of them are very earned. So can you name one thing that you don't like about this show?
I feel like you have to be really nitpicky.
Yeah.
I think if you like romance, you could argue that you would like to see the romances kind of fleshed out more. Like maybe it's with Frieren and Himmel, or maybe it's with Fern and Stark. But that's being really nitpicky. Like I don't mind the decisions they made and how they portrayed, both the budding romance and like the one where you're really not sure how they felt about each other. But other than that, I don't know. Maybe some of the characters in the second stage of the Aubers arc were just kind of thrown in there. Like I felt a little disappointed that the fight didn't happen in the last episode, even though the motivation for it felt super random and a little unclear. Like it felt like he just was the guy who never spoke up for himself, and so he thought he would get some sort of recognition for like killing Frieren, but like why? Like that didn't, it didn't feel very satisfying or believable there.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that's not a bad take for sure. But I think that maybe they wanted to do something with this guy, and they wanted to sort of flesh out Sari by happenstance of like, well, we want to talk a little bit about this guy, but he's just kind of like the vessel, right? And so it's more about like, hey, we know that Sari actually cares about these people, but maybe they just didn't have a great way to like say that. And they just wanted to utilize kind of that guy in a specific way because they had foreshadowed him, you know, and that's fair. I think that's a good job. And maybe we will get more of like the council and the mages and more history about that. And so specifically, it wanted to show that, I think, and then also a little bit of the, well, you know, the peacetime and all that stuff of like, well, this guy probably would have been the best like freaking mage of all time, you know, if he had some sort of war to fight, but I think they did it well, honestly. It didn't make me mad. Like, I do think that, you know, it's like, if you want to be really nitpicky, yeah, that's something you can say. And that's fair. But in my opinion, like, I think they solved it really well. It's like, oh, wow, Frieren can't do anything wrong. No, I don't think that. I just think that, like, you know, it just felt as though Frieren kind of solved the situation because she had deep, you know, character knowledge. And that's something that we don't really see of, like, other people having, like, very intimate knowledge of another character, so much so that, like, wow, like, she literally pointed out the, you know, Field of Flowers spell as being her master's favorite spell. And like Sari, she knew that, you know? So like, I do think that that was a good way to kind of put that, you know, lesson in the story, I guess. Okay, so if we're going on to question 8, what is the best part about Frieren?
There's so many good things. I think we've talked about a couple of them. So like I would say that one of the best things is just that reminder to value the little moments, like to not live a life filled with regret. And I like how that's showcased through the little things that impact each character along the way. Like you were talking about, you know, Flam's favorite spell was creating the Field of Flowers. And then Frieren went on to, you know, value things like that and value the little spells that were hidden everywhere. And then when Fern gets her spell from Sari, you know, she requests, you know, the laundry spell. Right? Like, and you know, it's funny to see, you know, two characters back to back who like had the potential to get any spell whatsoever, and it didn't even feel like they picked anything remotely selfish. Like it was something that like sparked joy, if anything. It wasn't a spell to like become a god of their world or anything, or like to make them a superhero to the people, or like you know, nothing really vain. It was just these really simple, like really sweet things, and they connected through that. Like,
yeah, and I think that's good too. And you know, what's all the more is like Frieren said, no, thank you, which is like the biggest flex, honestly. It's like, nah, that's not the fun.
It's journey before destination, right? Like she saw the value in the journey of discovery and not in like just having things handed to her.
Yeah, I think you just hit the title names. So Frieren's Beyond Journey's End. Okay, that's a great point. I love that. You know, if I had to say something, you know, what's the best part about this show? I would say that really it's a little cheap, I think. But if if I want to kind of encapsulate the whole thing, I want to say the moments, you know, such memorable moments that we can go back and say, like Stark defeating the dragon, Fern, you know, defeating, you know, the demon, and we can talk about, you know, what's his face, Sign, right? He defeats, or he awakens Frieren to defeat the flower, because he counts on her in that moment, based upon what she said. I think that, you know, all the moments that you can go back and remember fondly are what Frieren is about, you know. Specifically, I think you were talking about the little moments, but for me, I love to just go back and watch really big parts of the show of like, this is the epic battle, versus Qual, in episode 3. And then we go into episode 5, I think, 4 or 5, where they, fight. It's the funniest thing because they fight that monster that turns into characters to people that and it's like a phantom, and the phantom turns into Himmel, and then Himmel says, "Shoot me right now." And Frieren's like, that's exactly what he is. And that's such a beautiful, a little bit ironic, but very, genuine moment of like, in other anime, it would be like, oh, they get oh no, Himmel says, don't kill me, and then it's like, kill me. And it's like, why would that thing say that? That makes no sense. But like, it's so... Frieren really just transcends that normalcy in anime of like, actually, this is what he would really say.
Yeah, 100%.
So I do think that, it's sort of a cop-out, but I think I would choose the big moments we can always go back to. I think that's the epitome of Frieren, eclipses everything else in anime, in my opinion. But, let's go on to question 9 here. What did you think of this show kind of as a whole? Was there anything that you wanted to talk about before we get to the very last question?
I'm just really excited for a second season.
Okay.
I'm really cautiously optimistic that if they did season 1 well, assuming that the writing holds up in the manga, and from online chatter, it seems like it does. I think this will continue to be a really good show, and I just hope they take their time and don't rush anything. What I would love to see from a season 2, and maybe that's what I'd want to talk about a little bit, is almost like a Spy Family treatment, where it's like, they had a pretty good budget for season 1. They did pretty well. And then season 2, just the opening, credit scene, you're like, wow, they really spent some money to make this into something even better than it already was. And they didn't have to do that for it to still be a good show, because it could lean on the story. And that's what I hope to happen with Frieren as well, is we have a good story. You don't need to overthink it. Just keep doing what you did in season 1 and do it well.
Yeah. And so specifically, are you talking about Spy Season or Spy Family, the second part of the first season, Core 2?
Yeah, is that when they upgraded all the graphics and everything?
I think so. Yeah, because that was the really, how do you say, kind of the really well done opening and ending.
Yeah,
I think so. So specifically, yes, and that's. I don't know if you remember, but that part where Anya's riding the dog and they're going in superstar zone.
Right.
That was pretty great. Anyways, yes, I do think that would be incredible if we can get maybe, whatever anime studio. I personally think that Madhouse is doing a fantastic job. I love what they're doing. I think that, if you were to up the budget, how would that look, and would you go to a different animation studio? I don't know.
I'd stay with Madhouse. I think if anything, I'd love to see, because we always want more. I would love to see fight scenes on the quality of Demon Slayer's Red whatever it's called arc.
Entertainment
District.
Yeah,
the Entertainment District arc. Yeah. Those fight scenes are just so incredibly animated, and Frieren already does a great job with camera angles and using that to communicate different scenes super well. But with more budget and more time and more resources, who knows how much better it could get.
Yeah, and that's true. I think that it's hard for you to kind of replicate amazing things, but I think that with, like you said, with correct amount of time and planning and intentionality, I think you could do something a little bit even better as far as the animation goes. I honestly think that there are some anime, just for instance, I think Solo Leveling right now is we're kind of seeing that wall or ceiling they're hitting as far as animation budget goes. And when we're talking about Frieren, it's honestly, I just don't really care, even if it is, you know, like
Right.
I think that with the story, the pacing, but also like the pacing of the fight, right? Like how it's so built up and it hits this climax really, really, really fast, but then it has a very quick drop. I like that, because they can utilize like that budget, and they can utilize that really high quality animation in just a short time, and that's great, so they really packed a huge punch whenever they do hit,
Right.
whenever they do have a fight, and so I think that that's one of the cool things about Free. Now, we could talk a little bit more about animation, stuff like that, and Demon Slayer and that really height of animation. I agree with you. That's the height of animation that we don't normally get in things that don't have like high budgets and stuff like that. So I do agree with you. I think that season 2 could be even better if we're talking about more money, more time, and even like letting Studio Madhouse like get something even crazier.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a good last thing to talk about, I think, before we kind of hit this final. I could talk about Frieren for days, honestly, and I've talked about, I think I've made 12 different videos so far. But I just wanted to ask this question because I think it's very, keen on what we've talked about today a lot. How does Frieren utilize subtlety in its storytelling to where there's a greater impact than those flashy spectacles we were talking about?
Yeah, I think of a couple of things with this. One, there's this thing when you're creating art that you don't need to draw every line or fill in all the space for the viewer's eye to fill in everything. Like you see it best in like impressionist art, where when you're up close, you're like, oh, this is kind of muddy and like these weird little line textures. But then you back way up and you're like, oh, my mind is like filling in what's happening for me. And I think the same is true with like great storytelling. Like, when we were talking earlier about how there were those little time skips that helped, that they were barely mentioned, like, oh, they spent 6 weeks in the city cleaning it up. This adds to this like believability of how long they've been on a journey together. This wasn't like Fern and Stark joined yesterday and they hung out for like a week and then they beat the big bad. Like, no, these guys have been together for years. They've been training for years. They've developed really meaningful relationships, and we didn't have to watch 20 episodes of them traveling to Aubers. Like, we watched, every episode had consequence. Every episode had growth. There were several arcs within this season, all of which showed them growing. And they weren't stretched out unnecessarily. And that was just really satisfying. And, Stark in the Aubers arc wasn't even forced into scenes that he didn't need to be in. Like, you were just led to believe, like, homie's just enjoying relaxing in the background and not having Fern tell him what to do all the time. And then apologizing and feeling guilty when she comes and gets on to him, And I think it's those little moments, like, we have also talked at other points about how the show like handles time. Like, not a lot of shows handle time well and keep the show interesting. Like, I know a lot of people like Steins Gate. I'm not really a fan because pretty much anyone who describes it says like, oh, you have to watch like 20 episodes to really get it. And I'm not gonna do that. The average viewer is not about to watch 20 episodes before a show gets good, right? And with Frieren, like, you don't have to do that. Like, it's interesting from episode 1 because you have your main overarching stories, and you really have like 3 time frames that you're talking about, like the present, the past with the Party of Heroes, and then way back, like the pre-Party of Heroes stuff that kind of develops Frieren. And so because you have those 3 different time frames, when something happens in the present that references the past, albeit subtly, it's really satisfying because it almost feels like the inside story. You're an insider with the characters now in the present, knowing like, oh, because I've developed this viewer relationship with Frieren, I understand why it's meaningful to her to go to this location and watch this, sunset or the star, the stars in the sky, or when Fern chooses to a frivolous spell, why that's so meaningful to her, right? Because we've seen her time with Flam and how that relationship developed.
I 100% agree. I do think that like you're saying in the time aspect is just so well crafted, I guess I could say. that it's and to kind of hark back on your metaphor with the artistic paintings of like impressionists and things like that. Well, there's your art degree coming in.
Right. It was good for something.
Right. I think that's really, something that I hadn't noticed of like, yeah, you're right, that you're really comparing this metaphor of like from art, visually to art of storytelling. That you really don't have to like beat someone over the head of like, hey, did you know Frierin's like really strong? Did you know that? Did you know that? It's like, no, we just like, we accept the fact that she, can destroy someone on her own. But then sometimes she's like, hey, can you just provide me some cover for just 1 second? And it's just like, okay, we understand that Frierin's really strong. She's very powerful. She probably could defeat anyone in the universe. But at the same time, like, she might actually lose, And I think that's, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that really quick, like, she may be like with magic one of the strongest people ever, but even the weakest human has something she doesn't have, and that's that like self-awareness and that value of time and that ability to foster meaningful relationships with one another. And so even they have something like she desires, and she recognizes that she doesn't appreciate time the same way they do. And I think that's a really subtle difference. Whereas like in other shows, like I don't know that most protagonists with main character powers waste any time thinking about how like the peasants like, or like feel and what they can learn from them. But it definitely feels like Frieren not only looks at the party of heroes and not only looks at her traveling party, but even just like the day-to-day experiences she has with other people comes to realize like when she's asked, why didn't you help that woman? And then she gets a life lesson from a random third-party character that we were just introduced to in the short arc, but it's like meaningful and adds to the story. Like that's subtlety, and that's really satisfying.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I hadn't really thought about that as far as like something these, like you said, these peasants or people that, not really strong at all kind of reflect a character quality or an emotional state that she really just can't access, just because she has to take in all these things of like, I have to be alive for so long, I can only really care about a certain amount of things. For humans it's just like their passion shines through in these moments of like, and she's a little bit maybe even jealous or envious of that. That I think that you were hinting at.
Yeah, because I think Sign talks about, or later, that really they can avoid like making decisions for long periods of time, right? Because there's no real consequence.
Like Craft, or
or maybe it wasn't Sign. It was one of the characters.
The elf.
The elf, yeah.
He's Craft.
Okay. It was either Craft or Syria. It was talking about this, how...
Yeah, Craft right there, and then Sari.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can avoid making decisions for years because you've got the time. You can think about it, really consider all the possibilities. But, that's just not the case when your lifespan is, not guaranteed.
Yeah, and that's the part that, Heiter was trying to convince Frieren about, was like, hey, you need to stay here, like don't travel around, like, oh, if you could just figure out this grimoire real quick for me,
right? And
then like, oh, at the same time, like, can you train Fern maybe? And then so she does, and she realizes, well, actually I kind of do like Fern, and I think that it's very funny and ironic that Fern almost becomes like a motherly figure to Frieren.
The opposite of what you think. I mean, yeah,
exactly. And so even though she's this old, like maybe we see, maturity as like, as long as you grow older, you will get more mature. But we both know, like from people in our lives, there are people way older than both of us that they're not mature, you can be very old and be very immature. And I think that's part of the subtlety, right?
Yeah.
Of like Frieren saying, or Frieren the show saying, hey, look, Fern actually pretty mature, like very mature for her age, emotionally, and just kind of like even in her magic, she's mature, and so that kind of paints a little juxtaposition with her and her master Frieren. It's like, well, Frieren actually immature in some things,
Right.
And they didn't like you always say, they didn't have to beat us over the head with it. They didn't have to hark on this, lesson so much. And I think that, I wanted to talk a little bit about, subtlety as far as like emotion and facial features and things like that. I think that, in the dance scene where you see the Fern and Stark going, together in the dance, and they're going back and forth. And at first it's very awkward, very, formal, very stiff. And you see on their faces, they're unsure. But as they kind of, shift a little bit and kind of get into the motion, they start having fun. And you can really tell that by their facial features, which is like, bro, they didn't have to say a word. They didn't, it's like in so many other shows, like it'll like zoom in on their face and be like, look, 10 seconds, we need 10 seconds of this shot. And they're just like, no, you get maybe like 2 or 3 seconds to see like that glimpse of her face, glimpse of his face, and then it shifts like very fluidly. And I think that that's something great that we always talk about. Frieren does a great thing of like staying where it needs to and moving on when it wants to,
Yeah, like it wasn't like they needed to do like the Sakura Haruno thing from Naruto and like, black her face out and put a bubble up to the side and overly dramatically communicate these emotions. You're saying it was subtlety to every expression, and yet they captured it perfectly in a 2D art form. It's just really satisfying.
Yeah, and we didn't even know sometimes of like how certain characters were feeling. Like we didn't know why necessarily like Fern is upset, but it's filled in, and then also like they can tell us one thing, but they don't have to tell us everything. Like, show, don't tell. I think that's kind of like a cliche in the industry of like, if you can show something, do that. Like, show it. Don't say, well, this character looks very angry. It's like, well, duh. I mean, look at his face. It's just like, you don't have to do that. And I think that they really are very intentional about their subtlety, which kind of goes like the extra mile, because in other anime, you see one big face and it's just like, okay, we get it. They didn't really want to take the time, and that's fair. It's a different style of anime. But in this, it's like, dang, this is like some Oscar level stuff of like acting of like these characters, in an anime. So I do think that coupled with, like we said, we've talked a lot already, and we'll wind down here a little bit, but just as far as like pacing, the way they deal with time, like you're saying, art in all different forms, visually, storytelling. Also, we have like so many great characters that we get to dive into, but we don't spend, an absorbent amount on them all the time. And then also like the fights and how wonderful they look, even though they're not like the height of animation. Was there anything else that you had to cap off?
No. All I gotta say is I'm just really excited for season 2.
He's like, when is this gonna come out? Like, whoa,
yeah, I did season 2 yesterday. I think anytime you get a show this good of a story this addicting, like I want this to go on for a while. And really, there's no telling how long a story like this could go on for. I think, excited to see what Madhouse creates next.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do want to say, too, I think that I myself, I love, me, I love finality. I love Cowboy Bebop. I don't like things that go on too long, I don't want to drag things out. I think Frieren could stand, a few seasons. I would love to see some sort of like conclusion to this story in some sort of way. I don't know if it's traveling to the, heaven basically, to see some people. Yeah. Maybe that's a little bit of an ending, but also, it's such a great, thorough world,
Yeah, 2 to 6 seasons, I think it would end on a perfect note. I think if you start going beyond that, you run into the problems that any long-standing anime has, that, then you're past the manga and you're just forced to create your own thing, and then the fans get dissatisfied. Like, leave us wanting more. Don't make us regret the fact that you went on.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, like I said, there's just something about, conciseness, and like kind of the whole theme of Frieren we've been talking about already is like we don't need over explanations anymore. Like if you just create something very beautiful, and very quick and impactful, that's what I would prefer.
Yeah.
And I am looking forward to season 2. So, well, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, check out my other videos. Subscribe, guys.